Hello and welcome to Economic Lifelines Nigeria. I'm Esther Ugbodaga. For decades, indigenous operators in Nigeria's oil and gas industry lacked the capacity and expertise to take on big-ticket projects like their foreign counterparts. Today, we focus on the Nigeria Content Act and how it became a game-changer for local players. Oil was discovered in Nigeria in 1956 and has completely revolutionized the country's economy since then. This mainly agricultural country is now the continent's biggest oil exporter, and the black gold accounts for more than 80% of government revenues. For decades, the industry was dominated by international oil companies, which arrived in Nigeria with the expertise, financial capacity, and experience needed to harness the wealth hidden under the Nigerian soil and oceans. According to the Nigeria Content Development and Monitoring Board, Nigeria lost about $380 billion to capital flight and exported over 2 million jobs to other countries in over 50 years.
Oil was then a land business, what we call land and swamp business. Subsequently, as the drilling and the seismic studies began to unfold, we started seeing what they call offshore oil. So you had land and swamp and you had offshore. Subsequently, after the North Sea exploration, we now have what they call the deep water.
Since the discovery of oil, as far as some of us are concerned, let's keep the other aspect where people decided to just become lethargic or lazy. It was something that was like a blessing. And when you look at the graduation of the oil and gas industry from probably 1956 or 58 to date, I mean, I can tell you it's really matured today.
The IOC dominance was necessary at that time because they had the technology and they had the funding capacity. So, and the political will by successive governments was not really there.
This industry as a whole was dominated by those who had deep pockets and huge capital and had the integration to produce, refine, sell, and even use secondary products like petrochemicals, resins, and all of those things. I think that says it all. African countries and African entrepreneurs were nowhere in the field. They had no basis to compete.
Although the oil and gas industry was largely dominated by multinationals, Nigerians worked closely with some of the international oil companies, but mostly as casual staff. However, over the years, indigenous oil companies began to develop capacity, and some were also able to secure the resources needed to compete for big dollar contracts.
It was a very difficult time because the IOCs were not prepared to give opportunities to Nigerian companies, simply for the fact that they believe that they cannot do it, and they prefer to do businesses with foreign companies that are from their parent countries in Nigeria. So that created an atmosphere that made it impossible for Nigerian companies to even have the opportunity to even try, or even given the opportunity to attempt, the opportunities that exist in the oil and gas industry.
Definitely, you will also have ancillary services. Somebody must be a mechanic. Somebody will be a vulcanizer. You will have cooks. You will have drivers. They needed all these add-ons, to make them successful. Because we were not expecting them to bring experts to come and be mechanics and cooks here. So they did all those. But as usual, there is a saying in my language that if a child does not die, the child will eventually grow. They came with the technology. They came with the know-how. Of course, they needed to train Nigerians. They needed to identify people who are good in sciences and technology, and they sent some of them to some of the great institutions.
Between the oil operating company and the oil service company, the oil contractors, and all the others, there are so many activities which in the past were dominated, including what they call FPSO, the storage facilities and all that. They were all dominated by international players. Marine, the the rigs, the houseboats, the tugs, and all of that. So all of these things were dominated almost 100%.
At such points, probably some Nigerians started feeling they were not being given the positions they deserve. That was the beginning of agitations.
The industry makeup was changing, but slowly. In 2010, after several meetings and deliberations with industry stakeholders, President Goodluck Jonathan signed into law the Nigeria Content Act. The Act provides that independent Nigerian operators shall have the first consideration in the award of oil blocks and lifting licenses.
The government of Nigeria and the industry found that, like most other sectors actually, much of the services, the procurement, and all of the value added within the industry was imported. And therefore, the Nigerian economy was not getting the maximum or the optimal benefit from having such a large oil sector. So yeah, it was necessary to introduce some compulsion or encouragement to ensure that the local players get capacity and get to participate within the industry.
What the government of Nigeria wanted to do was to say, in the event that there is an opportunity, right, and a Nigerian company or a Nigerian human asset has what it takes to provide this service, give the Nigerians a priority. But the Nigerian government didn't just go out and wanted to do that. I mean, there were examples in different parts of the world. We saw what was happening in the UK, in the North Sea. We saw what was happening in places like Norway. So when Nigeria started, it was something that people applaud till today. It's doing well, we are growing, but we must never dilute standards.
Most of the companies are now beginning to have the opportunities to do those jobs that actually were kept for companies that are from overseas or companies that are from parent companies. So what it has done actually, is to allow Nigerians to participate in those aspects of, the oil and gas exploration, mining, drilling, fabrication, and all that, which before, wasn't possible. So the NCD had made it mandatory for Nigerians to be given a particular percentage of some of these jobs.
Agitation by Petroleum Technology Association, they saw that, look, we cannot continue like this, cannot continue to play second fiddle, and then there's no value addition to, to the indigenous people, and then a lot of money are being taken out of the country. That was not helping employment generation for the country. And then some semi-skilled people from other countries, they will come here and become managing directors and chief operating officers of, industries that local men and women could be trained, to take charge.
The Nigeria Content Development and Monitoring Board, the NCDMB, was also established. Its mission is to increase indigenous participation in the oil and gas industry, build local capacity and competences. The NCDMB also had to retain over $10 billion over the next 4 years from the industry, out of an average annual expenditure of $20 billion. This was primarily to tackle capital flight.
The act that was signed into law by President Goodluck Jonathan in April 2010, the board were there to implement those acts and to empower the people and to create, revenue for government and then to generate employment for the, within the citizenry. The board came late. It would have been there maybe in the last 15 years, maybe would have achieved far more feats than what we have achieved so far. But better late than never.
The Nigerian Content and Development Monitoring Board is there to basically help you develop yourself, your potentials, such that from being a service provider in Nigeria, you may end up being a service provider in Angola, in Cameroon, in Ghana. They are not just, their intention is not to just make you rich or make you think you are a local champion, and when you are thrown to the international pedestal, you cannot cope. That's not what they are there to do. And the same thing as an operator. We already have Nigerian operators who are already having blocks outside the shores of Nigeria.
4 years on, local participation is growing.
Being Nigerian, operating Nigerian, and getting the support from the government to say, well, as a Nigerian company, we will back you with these laws is definitely a plus. And it has encouraged us to do more in terms of training pilots and engineers and building infrastructure. On our aviation side of the business, I think in terms of infrastructural development, we are the leading company. We have 4 hangars in Nigeria right now. We have the only operating fully functional in-city helipad on Ozumba in Ikoyi. And we also will now be building the first training center, commercial aviation training center in Africa. It's never been done before. We're doing this in partnership with CAE, who are leading supplier of software and simulators for both fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft. So we see the local content laws as a stamp of approval, sort of, or a sort of pat on the back from the federal government to say, don't worry, we're here to support you. And for that, yes, we are grateful.
There are so many ways the NCD has impacted on Nigerian companies. You know, one of the things that has happened with the NCD is that before the NCD particularly, the IOCs, you know, feel like, you know, when they want to deal with Nigerian companies, they feel they're doing these companies favor. I mean, we just want to help them if you want. But you see, when the Act came into being, they were still also doing that. I mean, saying, if you go to a company to look for a job or to look for something to do for them, it's okay, why don't you come tomorrow? Why don't you come next tomorrow? But when the Act started getting grants, it became difficult for them to, you know, to keep doing that. And they found out that now that the thing is now a law passed by the Nigerian government, it becomes part of the things that if you go against it, you'll be sanctioned, or you even go to jail.
55% of you know, platform support, and mostly in the maritime sector, is being generated, owned, and operated by Nigerian marine vessel owners. Now, the budget in that sector is over $5 billion. Now, if you have 55% of that being owned and operated by Nigerians, you know what that translates to in terms of foreign exchange and the dollar we have saved. We are saving over 2 billion, close to 3 billion in that alone. Now, in shipyards, right, and dockyards, today, many of those dockyards are being upgraded, right? They are being upgraded, and that revenue is saving for the country.
According to the Nigeria Content Development and Monitoring Board, the success of the policy has been unprecedented. Statistics from the board show that more than 30,000 jobs have so far been created in areas including marine vessel servicing, fabrication, and design engineering. Although Nigeria's local oil and gas operators now have a greater share of the industry, the challenges they face have changed.
The cost of a dry well onshore, land and swamp, is $30 million. If you drill and find suboptimal oil reserves, it's going to cost you $30 million, which you have to write off. If you do 10 of those, $300 million, no, it's not possible. So, and how to engage the service of Halliburton, Schlumberger, and others, you need to have deep pockets. So the barriers to entry are high. The financial constraint being the most, the technological constraint being the other issue. So it's not a game for kids, it's not a game for interns. It's a game for the pros and those with deep pockets and resolute and focused.
Getting access to cheaper finance has always been a big stumbling block for Nigerian entrepreneurs and Nigerian companies as a whole. That has been one of the main problems we've had when competing with our foreign competitors, because obviously they have access to much cheaper finances. in terms of access to skilled labor, we're just as, our engineers and pilots are just as good as any you'd find worldwide.
You know, we pay 1% NCD money on all contracts. Every contract awarded in the oil and gas industry has 1% that goes to the NCD board. One of the things that I believe should encourage the newcomers into the industry is for government to have a special kind of fund. What I mean by fund is not this 1% is just good, but it's not enough. Where the new companies should be able to access funds easily to deliver projects. Because if you don't have a security, if you don't have anything to fall back on, you cannot borrow money from the bank. So there must be special arrangement where some of these companies, will have access to funds, so that they'll be able to do the smaller projects that will now help them to grow into bigger companies to do bigger projects.
Local Content Development Fund is not to be used in funding indigenous companies. The monitoring board is almost on its own like a commercialized body. It needs to be self-sustaining. So the essence of that 1% for every service rendered, for every money paid to me if I render service, that extra 1% actually is to help in maintaining and keeping the monitoring board alive. Because most of the time we said the reasons why Africans or Nigerian institutions fail is because they are appendages of the government. But with what is happening now, they are going to be self-sustaining.
After the break, we'll continue our focus on the Nigeria Content Act and also see if this policy can be replicated in other key sectors of the Nigerian economy. Welcome back to Economic Lifelines Nigeria. We now continue our focus on the Nigerian Content Act and how it's empowering indigenous oil and gas players in the country. Since 2010, international oil companies operating in Nigeria have been selling off some of their onshore assets, a number of which have been acquired by indigenous operators. For example, while Royal Dutch Shell received proceeds worth over $2 million from the sale of 8 oil blocks, US-based ConocoPhillips sold its onshore assets to Oando Energy Resources in a deal worth $1.7 billion. Other Nigerian oil and gas firms that have clinched big-ticket oil and gas deals include Seplat, Lecoil, and Afrin. According to Nigeria's Minister of Petroleum Resources, these international oil companies are expected to divest over 20 oil blocks with not less than 4 billion barrels of oil per day, worth $11.5 billion before the end of 2014. While these divestments have been regarded by the Nigerian government as a good opportunity for local players, reactions have been mixed.
We must address why those people are divesting, and we know why they're divesting. The absence of fiscal terms, the absence of a regulatory environment, concerns about political risk and country risk issues, concerns about industry regulation, and all of those regulatory gaps and oversight issues that exist within the oil industry. For the long-term sustainability of those Nigerian institutions buying those assets, those issues have to be addressed. Even though perhaps locals may be slightly better than foreigners in managing some of the difficulties in the sector, but it would only be marginally so. In the end, you would have to deal with the fundamental issues to assure the long-term sustainability and profitability of those entities.
What the IOCs are honestly doing in this their divestment is they are moving away because of business climate hostilities. That's exactly what they are doing. And you can explain this. I mean, the petroleum industry bill has not probably been passed for close to a decade.
The Petroleum Industry Bill is a wide-ranging piece of legislation that seeks to reform the oil and gas sector along with the accompanying regulatory bodies. this bill is still pending in the National Assembly almost 10 years after it was first introduced.
Because of the PIB, the activities in the oil industry has just gone down. It's just heading down because there isn't much activities going on. And when there is not much activities, the local companies won't have much to do in the economy because most of the IOCs are not doing things new. They are not investing. It's only when they invest that they will now stir up the oil and gas business industry. And there will be activities all over the place.
The industry has suffered from it. It's clear in the data. You see decline. So, of course, when the industry is suffering, local players who are the weakest would clearly suffer as well.
Oil and gas business basically accounts for the oxygen of Nigerians' revenue. When you talk about an industry or a sector like that, there is no reason why you will have laws or acts like that that will be staying with your members of assembly or with your members of parliament for so long.
The PIB in itself isn't the problem, is the decision or is the uncertainty that is causing this sort of investments. If people knew what the future had in store for them, then it's easier to plan.
Nigeria is still a mono-product economy. And for being a mono-product economy, it simply means anything that is required to galvanize activities that will bring in further revenue and grow the aggregate macroeconomic structures of Nigeria, that thing should never be delayed. The petroleum industry bill has been sitting for close or more than a decade. No country will allow, or no members of parliament of a country will allow a sensitive document like that to keep staying. As long as you don't pass that into law, there will be no legal and regulatory framework or document that will bind the oil and gas industry of Nigeria and people who are intentional players.
For now, they continue to take advantage of new opportunities as a result of the local content policy.
Some companies are building refineries as we speak, and then they're building refineries to even check theft, right? And then those refineries are going to be producing, diesel and petrol for consumption locally.
The Nigerian oil industry is here to stay, and for the foreseeable future, oil will still be the primary source of energy.
The success of the Nigeria Content Act has attracted the attention of a few African countries. In January this year, the government of Congo-Brazzaville invited the NCDMB to help it put in place policies on national content, privatization, and commercialization. Kenya has also reached out to the board to assist with the design of local content policies for its extractive industry. Nigeria's Minister of Petroleum Resources has also underscored the adoption of the local content policy in other sectors of the Nigerian economy.
We have to develop a local content strategy for each sector that assures quality and that prevents local content from developing into an instrument of political patronage that lowers standards. So it is possible for us, and we have to do it on an industry by industry basis, to look at each sector, create alliances, for instance, such that you encourage, or where necessary you compel, say, Julius Berger to use Nigerian subcontractors and to build their capacity. So it doesn't have to be in one fell swoop. You get them to parcel out parts of the work to Nigerian entities, and while building Nigerian capacity. It's the same in aviation, how much of the servicing of aircrafts and all of those expensive C checks, D checks, all of those things are done locally. Even the general pattern of Nigerian consumption. We take holidays, medical trips, education, all of those sectors are things where we could have significant domestic value added if we improve domestic quality.
As multinational oil companies divest onshore assets and move into more challenging frontiers in Nigeria's deep offshore, only local operators with the resources to take up these assets will benefit from such opportunities. However, with no new investments being made at the moment by international oil companies, the future of Nigeria's oil and gas industry remains uncertain. New discoveries currently being made in other parts of the continent, particularly in East African countries, underscores the need for the Nigerian government to put in place a broad regulatory framework that would attract new investors, both foreign and local. Although the industry is not a massive employer of labor, it's a good source of financial resources that can be used to develop other sectors. In the meantime, industry players hope the local content policy can continue to empower indigenous players to operate alongside multinationals and perhaps allow them form strategic alliances in the not-too-distant future. That's a wrap on today's episode of Economic Lifelines Nigeria. Remember, you can catch this and past episodes of the show on our website. That's www.cnbcafrica.com. I'm Esther Obodaga. Bye for now.